Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. I'm your host, Barney Smith of StoryComic.com, and we're excited to have with us the acclaimed and internationally celebrated author of The Black Cyclone, A Hero the World Forgot, John Kennedy Howard. John.
It's a real pleasure to be here, Barney.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about this book. So this book came out last year, correct?
Yes, it did.
What drew you to Major Taylor's story? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, frankly, he was my boyhood hero. Somewhere along the line, I think it might have been Stephen Green Press or one of the publications came out with an abridged version of Major Taylor's original autobiography, which I have an original copy of now. And it intrigued me that this man who was black had raced and had been a remarkable athlete. In fact, the best paid athlete in the world. He pulled in almost 10 times the amount of money that Ty Cobb, the famous baseball player from I believe it was the Detroit Tigers, he outpulled Ty Cobb by almost 10 times the amount of money in a single season. So cycling was bigger than baseball, but Major Taylor was certainly the dominant figure worldwide. He was the first acclaimed African American sports hero worldwide. And you have to understand that this was a period in American history, a dark period in American history, when blacks were simply not allowed to play. You will see that it was very common for race promoters to mark their League of American Wheelmen entry forms with white riders only.
Mm.
So that gives you an idea of the period temperament that Major Taylor had to endure in that late 1890s period through about actually his last race, I believe, was 1917. He had a very long career, but he fought racism on every front.
Can you discuss the type of research that was necessary for writing The Black Cyclone?
Well, yes, I traveled a lot to many of the venues, which of course don't always include bike tracks at this point. But I was in a traveling mode at that time, and I left. I was the bibliothèque in Paris, which is just there's tons of information in the microfiche labs. There's the Rum Library. I call it the Rum Library because that's how the money was raised to build it. In Sydney, Australia, where Major Taylor was dominant for a number of years, and I found all kinds of information. I poured through those microfiche labs for hours at a time, try to glean as much information about my boyhood hero as I could. And I had the good fortune to be inducted into the United States Cycling Hall of Fame the same year as my boyhood hero, Major Taylor. And at that ceremony, actually had renewed an acquaintance with Sydney Taylor Brown, who was Major Taylor's only daughter. And she was born in Sydney, Australia, during her father's peak. I think one peak season. I think it was 1903, maybe. So she had no real information about the time that she wasn't born, but she knew enough because he had left his archives, and she read through all of that material because she was very proud of her father, obviously. And um, so the beauty of it was that she welcomed me into her home in Pittsburgh, and we would sit for hours. And I interviewed Sydney sometimes to the point where she just couldn't go any further. And I caught her in her mid 80s. She was still quite lucid at the time, and
Mm.
shared with me all of these adventures, and mostly, I think, what had happened to her father after retirement, which was not all good. Um, he had some great moments in history, but retirement, there was a slow decline, of course, as any athlete would feel that. Uh, but there was so much more to this man than anyone at the time knew or could really appreciate. An example, he was a brilliant inventor, had engineering technology wired. His coach, Bertie Munger, spent many hours teaching him the art of machining. And that was at the factory, the Munger Bicycle Factory. Bertie Munger had this factory in both Indianapolis, where Major Taylor was born, as well as Worcester, Massachusetts, which was his adopted hometown after I think he was about 16 or 17 when he moved to Worcester with Coach Munger. So that's a side of him that almost nobody knows about. He invented the uh, adjustable stem on his bike, and interestingly enough, none of the other riders were using it, and it allowed him to tuck a little lower. He was not a big man; he was about 5'6", 5'7", but he was able to get lower than almost any of the other riders. If you look at his profile on the bike, you'll see that he had his elbows bent. He was down on the hooks. He appears to me to be 6 or 7 inches lower than one of his strongest adversaries, Floyd McFarland, who was 6'4".
Mm.
So when you have that kind of improved aerodynamics, it certainly doesn't hurt. But the riders at the time, I don't think really understood the value of being aero. But Major Taylor did, and he adjusted that stem depending on the type of competition that he would be encountering, whether the steepness of the bank, the distance he was riding, such as the New York 6 Day, where he rode in a more reclined position because of the tremendous number of miles that he had to cover. So the stem the stem was something that unfortunately he got no credit for it. Munger used it on his Munger Special bicycles, and I think there were even versions of it that were used on his next sponsor, Ivor Johnson.
Mm.
Ivor Johnson was manufactured bicycles and handguns.
Okay. Mm.
So that a strange combination, but both required a lot of machine work to make perfect. And so that's what Ivor Johnson did, and he was a huge sponsor of Major Taylor throughout his career. And after he retired, um, he had this idea. Let me set the tone here. World War I. He had a
Mm.
deferment. I've seen Sydney sent me a lot of the archives, and I have an actual draft deferment card from the U.S. government, in which he bowed out because of his machining uh, strengths. And one of the things that was in, we believe, short supply at the time was rubber. There was a lot. If you look at any of the bicycle tires of this era, you'll see that they don't have cracks in them like a lot of modern tires. They didn't crack because they were natural latex rubber from places like the Congo and or South America. And I still have some 140-year-old tires. Unfortunately, they're too stretched out to use on any period bike, but they're in excellent condition. Tread is still there. They don't have any cracks at all. Well, that's the era we're talking about here. So what Major Taylor did, he believed that war was coming, and he had dropped. He wasn't riding his bike. His career was essentially over, and he created what was referred to as the spring wheel. He called it the Taylor tire. And what it included, it's really impossible to describe this gadget, but it had a series of springs that were loaded from the hub, and that went into a casing, and at the top of the casing were small sections of natural latex rubber. And because most of the rubber was going to the war effort in Europe, uh, tires, I mean, we were patching I wasn't, but tires were being patched, and patches on top of patches on tubes to keep automobiles on the road. Well, Taylor's idea was this sectional wheel, which vastly improved the suspension systems on early automobiles, um, because the springs would compress radially around the hub. So each one of those little sections would compress, and so it actually improved some of the early leaf spring trucks and even most of the automobiles. And you got to remember that the only real paved roads were in New England at the time, and most of them were in pretty bad shape. So we needed better roads, and the League of American Wheelmen jumped on that one, and they actually succeeded in getting more roads paved at the time. I'm jumping ahead radically, but you get the idea. Major Taylor was an inventor. He was a very creative man. Sadly, they denied him uh, the right to participate in any engineering courses at the Polytechnical Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. They they labeled it an applicant does not have a high school diploma. Well, if you go back to Major Taylor's early days, he was essentially adopted by the Southard family. This was a very wealthy railroad family in Indianapolis, um, and they had a very large house. Major Taylor's father, Gilbert, was hired uh, on the spot when at a horse show when fire broke out, and he was able to extinguish the fire quickly. I don't quite know how he did that. Maybe he put his coat down on it or something. But whatever happened then, he was hired on the spot to be the Southard's coachman, which of course was an important title because the coachman in the day would have been responsible for all transportation needs for the entire family. Well, they subsequently adopted. It wasn't Major Taylor; it was Marshall Taylor at the time. He hadn't acquired that nickname yet, uh, but he became Major in short order after his first real competition. he but I want to go back to the educational part of that. He had a tutored education, and out of that tutelage, his focus was on engineering, anything. And he loved in the internal combustion engine, which was just getting started at the time. And so Taylor came into a very exciting post-industrial revolution period of time when bicycles were, the transitional uh, form of transportation for the young at heart, those who were tired of train rides and certainly the horse and buggy. Um, it was a period of time when roads were bad. There was a lot of animal dung on the roads, and so it wasn't a particularly happy time for anybody. But bicycles were clean, and they became hugely popular for about 10 or 15 years before the invention of the motorcycle and then the automobile.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. What lessons can contemporary athletes and sports fans learn from Taylor's life?
Um, Major Taylor was a strong um, believer in self worth, self value. He was extremely religious. It was an era when religion was important, especially to African Americans, and he believed wholeheartedly that his God rode with him on his bicycle at all times. And he staunchly refused to ride or race on the Sabbath. And that was an
Hmm.
important um, career junction for him when he decided that he would not race at all on a Sunday. Promised his mother on her deathbed that he would not do that. And he stuck with that principle throughout his career. It changed at the end, but he he believed that the power of the Almighty was everything in terms of generating power and speed on the bicycle. So, what's the takeaway? Gosh, a strong Midwestern work ethic. I had it. I was my parents gave me nothing. They said, if you want it bad enough, you will work for it. And I did. And I think that is exactly what happened to Major Taylor. And that's kind of why our careers kind of paralleled in some respects. That um, he everything he did on his own. The paper route where he was throwing papers, the learning how to be a cycling acrobat, which would come back to help him immensely in his racing career, because there would be times in a final heat, final race, uh, that maybe a third of the field in that race would be riding not to win, but to make damn sure Taylor
Hmm.
didn't win.
And so, what do you hope readers take away from the Black Cyclone?
Well, it's a great story. I think it's an enjoyable story that everybody will appreciate. It has a little bit of a twist plot at the end. Um, it's largely a story of this indomitable man who created his own future. He had the gift of pure speed, and that helped him. Um, but I think it also tells the story of what happened to him after he retired. And as I said, it's not all pleasant. There's some very sad moments in the book, but it is the real story, the story that almost can't be. I had the advantage of interviewing Sidney, and some of Major Taylor's actual contemporaries, like Alf Goulet, literally in the final months of their lives. So I was really lucky to have that. I think there are several people that have I think Peter Nye and Michael Cranish may have had conversations with Sidney, but I spent hours and hours and hours going through this so that I would be able to tell the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Um, it was uh, a, a important to go beyond where the retirement ends, and I think that's the sad part is that uh, he was denied the opportunity to pursue a engineering career, and he was a very giving man. He gave to his church. He gave to the um, membership at large. He had three large uh, apartment buildings in Worcester, Massachusetts, and a lot of times these people simply didn't have the money to pay the rent, and he would let them off. He wouldn't push them for it. And eventually, of course, he had essentially, it wasn't an era when you declared bankruptcy, but from being one of the wealthiest, certainly one of the wealthiest African Americans in the U.S. to having, you know, virtually nothing. He used his money to publish his autobiography, and then went to bike clubs, and uh, anyone that wanted to buy one of his books could do so, and they were cheap. He recovered his costs, but in the end, there was at the uh, YMCA in Chicago, where he eventually died. There was a large box of unsold books still there.
Wow.
So yeah, buried in a pauper's grave in Glenmont Memorial Cemetery in Chicago. That's the real story, and today he's revered. There are over 250 bicycle clubs that honor him, but like a lot of period athletes, artists, etc. He died penniless.
How does Major Taylor's legacy influence today's conversations about race and sports?
Well, I think he was an early pioneer. I really believe that. I think in terms of racial uh, structure, he was a very good friend of W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the founder of the NAACP, also Crisis Magazine. Uh, Du Bois was a bit of a radical at the time. He didn't. He was not as straight laced as another of Major Taylor's friends, Booker T. Washington, who he couldn't see the beyond the black athlete, the young black athletes who he believed had that gift of speed that he had, and he so wanted them to pursue the sport, but life was changing at that point. It was becoming more. I want to talk about the motors because that's an important part of the sport in the era, and I will. But uh, unfortunately, again, not that many African American. There were, as I said earlier, they weren't allowed to play. They
Mm.
simply weren't allowed to play. And then finally, they started getting some recognition, but it literally was not until the late 50s and early 60s before civil rights took off. We know that. And Major Taylor believed that it was important to give African Americans a voice. He had a long list of places. Sydney shared this with me, that where he was welcomed and treated well by mostly black families, and those, it was almost a Green Book. If you saw the film Green Book or read the book,
Mm-hmm.
it was almost that story, because he had all of these contacts, which of course were fleeting, but nevertheless he put that out there, and actually had it printed up, for travelers, African American travelers who were going to such and such a place. Some in the South, but uh, after his career got started, he never dropped below the Mason-Dixon line after a really ugly incident in Savannah.
Mm.
Cycling was huge in the South. Atlanta had a velodrome, or Savannah had a track. The cycling was really booming in the South, but Major Taylor decided after that incident in Savannah he would not go below the Mason-Dixon line again, because that was the point of no return. Bicycles were evolving into motorcycles. The machines of the day, things like bikes like the Orient pacing tandem, which was a real sturdy tandem, uh, had a lot to do. They would hang these, usually a Didion Bertone French single cylinder motor, in the back triangle, and the pacer, or sorry, the stoker would operate the motor, and get the carburation right and adjust it, and work the motor while the captain would steer the bike. These were the first motorcycles ever, and
Wow.
they had one purpose, and that was to pace racing cyclists on the bike track.
Okay.
So prior to that, it was all human pace. So you could only push a tandem, triplet, or quad so fast, and then you were done. So the bicycle evolution, which of course included things like the pneumatic tire, which was invented by John Boyd Dunlop in 1888. That was a bicycle invention.
Mm.
In this case, for
Mm.
his son, who was an avid cyclist, and the spiral bevel gear, which was something Major Taylor set 5 world records on. That was a shaft drive,
Mm.
which later became the differential on the automobile.
Right.
So there were some important inventions, but it was also a tremendously dangerous era for bicycle racing, and part of the reason was because the tracks were tight, maybe 250, maybe 400 meters on the big ones, but because they were so tight and so steeply banked, the evolution of the motorcycle, I mean, chains would snap, bikes would break, and
Mm.
catastrophic accidents would occur. In some cases, racers, pacers, and spectators would die.
Right.
So, what was it? It was the NASCAR of the day. It was the excitement that people
Right.
wanted to see, and that's why it was. I always say cycling was the most popular sport of the day for all the wrong reasons.
So, if people want to purchase the book, where's the best place they could go to?
Amazon has it in a couple of days. I think you can get it. Our website, themajortaylorstory.com. I certainly
Mm.
welcome people to tune into that one. Um, Barnes and Noble has it. It's available in all formats: hard copy, soft copy, ebook, and now Audible. So you can
Perfect.
go on Audible and get an Audible version of it as well.
Excellent.
So it's
All
available
right.
everywhere.
Excellent. So yeah, so they can actually learn more about the story and purchase the book, as you say, is at majortaylorstory.com. And we'll have that link in the show notes for everybody to check out. This is fascinating, John. I appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm certainly glad to be here, Barney. It's always a treat for me to talk about one of my favorite subjects.